Hello.
Hi, Elliot.
I'm William.
Hi.
William.
Hi.
Hi there.
Nice to meet you.
Hi there.
Hi there.
Nice to meet you, Lucy.
Hi. And Trudy? I think we've met before.
These are
Once or twice.
I don't know if we'll have information on
Are they all the same?
No, they're all different. They're all different.
Can you put them all together
Yeah.
and I'll hold them together
Yeah.
as one and the guys can look at
On
them?
a related note, Trudy, that's from Richard.
Okay, firstly, I'd just like to thank all of the panel for your time. We appreciate you're probably very busy and we're really grateful for this opportunity. And, my name's Elliot Schilling and I'm looking to investigate the difference in biodiversity on a fixed quay in Fowl Estuary, looking at the difference of a recreational harbour compared to the commercial harbour.
I'm William West and I'd like to look at non-native species, comparing the fixed recreational and the fixed commercial parts of the harbour.
I'm Lucy Barnes and I will be looking at the biodiversity on the floating pontoons, the commercial and recreational.
Yeah, my name's Steve Downing and I shall be looking at non-native invasive species in the Fowl Harbour, comparing recreational non-fixed free-floating pontoons against commercial free-floating pontoons. And I think we're going to do a brief piece on the definition.
Yeah, well, invasive species basically is a global problem, one that is definitely affecting the southwest. Plymouth have found three invasive species that they are predicting to arrive in the Fowl in the very near future. The invasive species cause problems to our native species. They overrun the biodiversity of our native species, affecting the infrastructure of the harbour. They also affect fisheries. In the case of the Fowl, we have the oyster fishery and the mussel beds. And also they spread disease, and it has been known for disease to spread into humans. So as you can see, in looking at the invasive species, it's going to have positive effects towards the Fowl in preserving the harbour that we have here in Falmouth.
And in terms of biodiversity, it's that's simply defined as the amount of species in a given area, and biodiversity is quite closely tied in with invasive species, and invasive species are a direct threat to biodiversity, and also with a weaker biodiversity there's less resistance for invasive species. So obviously with a high biodiversity it's harder for the invasive species to come in and compete with the native species. So as sort of the biodiversity decreases, there's more invasive species that can come in, so it's like a negative multiplier effect, so it just keeps getting worse and worse until they eventually take over. And there are many implications of a decreased biodiversity. A lot of them are economic. A lot of sort of tourism relies on biodiversity being high, sort of like the scuba diving and fishing trips that go on in the Fowl rely on there being native species there to catch and to look at. And also a lot of the pharmaceutical industry looks at marine biodiversity for developing new drugs and existing drugs to maintain the sort of constant flow that we require.
Ideal. We've been looking at an experiment designed and pioneered by the Marine Biological Association based in Plymouth, which they've trialled many techniques and materials, but what they've come up with, what they prefer and recommend, is something based on these polypropylene sheets. Yeah. And we don't intend to use sheets that big, to 15 by 15 centimetre panels, and we're looking to attach those to the various pontoons, fixed harbours in Falmouth, and species will settle upon them, which will tell us a lot about biodiversity and also the invasive species that we might see around here. And so, yeah, and so just a very simple outline of the harbour shows that is what gives us direction on our projects. We have the free-floating platforms, so if we were to attach panels to them, they would be constantly immersed as the tide goes up and down. And the fixed areas where which would be exposed by the tide and resubmerged by the high tide. So we expect to see completely different species distribution on panels in those two areas. And then obviously you have commercially dominated piers and wharves, harbours and what have you, and recreationally used. So we suspect, and we very much hope, that we'll get 2 data sets comparing recreational versus commercial in each of the 2 terrain types. And from each of those 2 data sets, we should be able to determine biodiversity and invasive species levels. And for each area that we intend to sample, we're going to put up to 10 of these pieces cut down into 15 by 15 panels, and we'll probably go for something called sacrificial sampling, where we'll take the panels away, sample them, and then probably won't reuse them, because that will probably do for the organisms living on them, sadly, for them. And so a couple of questions we have for the not this panel but that panel is there any chance that we could get a mooring, because we might be able to get access to a boat, access to a boat, so that would save us having to be reliant upon you, and that could be a useful thing if that's a possibility. Also, another question is how important is it to the Harbour Commission that we work up at the mussel farm, because we suspect that not only is it tricky to get from Falmouth up to the mussel farm, relative to all the other areas that we've looked at in the harbour, but we suspect there'll be a salinity level, a gradient between the harbour and the mussel farm, which will affect the species distribution and will skew the data.
You're asking the wrong harbour master.
Well, I mean, actually, yes, it's not part of our pack. So
oh, okay.
We would have no particular. I mean, obviously, we're looking at this as the measure of diversity on the types of structures we find within our harbour.
Yeah.
We very much welcome that approach. I mean, in terms of if there are sort of significant differences that are going to make it more difficult for you to monitor the mussel growing area, we wouldn't have any particular concerns about that. And certainly not if it's going to skew the results. What we want is to get meaningful data that we can rely on in this particular subject area.
Okay.
As far as the mooring is concerned, I'm afraid we have to say we'll see. It would depend on what the type of craft was and whether it's compatible and what we've actually got available. But it's certainly something that, we're very keen to promote research of this type, and if we can help and that's a practical solution, then we would certainly consider that.
But there are structures up, King Harry Ferry, Trefusis Gardens have got pontoons, there are structures up there.
Yes.
I'm sure if you spoke to Tim Knight and Mark Gillyback, who's the other harbour master, I don't think they object to you, but it'll give you a wider range.
Yes, exactly.
But it's a bit of a punt, if you have to do it on a daily
basis. That's it. I mean, the handout that we've got from the Harbour Commissions, bi-weekly, if not a sample, then at least a look at what's going on.
When you look at Mountcastle, it was all tied and I'm Penryn on it.
Yeah.
Can I ask what are the 3 species that they've identified?
Well, on the journals I've given you there's carpet sea squirts,
right.
Japanese wireweed,
right.
and the name escapes me, but it's another slipper limpets, but there is another Ascidian, another sea squirt.
I thought they were here. I thought they found them.
They found them here, as far as I knew, that they were in Plymouth, and they were.
I remember a lady coming from, where the lady Jazz.
Yes, Jazz Metcalf.
Jazz Metcalf,
from Cornwall.
Right. Okay, so they've actually.
I'm sure.
Been found.
Could be wrong.
No, a couple of those have arrived. The ones that Will's probably talking about is that they've got a new set of Ascidians and sponges that we literally saw at Easter time.
Oh, really?
At the NBA, and they fed through to say, actually, they're here.
Yeah.
This is in Plymouth. They're here. We don't think they've hit Falmouth yet. If you get a project up and running, you might. Yeah.
We may find they're there already.
Be the first ones.
What's the NBA?
Marine Biological
Association of the United Kingdom.
Can I just check? I might not have been paying attention. I haven't read the briefs. How is what you two are doing different to what these two are doing?
Well, me and William will be looking at. I'll be personally looking at biodiversity and William invasive on fixed keys. So a possible location was up at the Greenbank Hotel on their fixed key, and down on one of the fixed keys at possibly AMP or Pendennis. In the Steve and Lucy on the floating
So you've got
pontoons.
the tidal range, whereas
Why do you think there's likely to be a significant difference between the areas within the commercial establishments and the areas that are only used for recreation?
Well, one of the biggest contributors to invasive species is through ballast water coming in from commercial ships. So maybe the ballast water is right there with the commercial ships on the commercial harbour, but it may have affected the recreational, but that's what we want to see, where it's located, and if it's affecting the whole harbour, or just part of it. And also there are studies made that high amounts of biodiversity of native species causes it's harder for invasive species to settle there. So I expect to see a larger biodiversity in the recreational part of the harbour compared to the commercial. So therefore maybe more, because of more shipping at the commercial part of the harbour compared to the recreational.
So you think that will disturb?
I think so, yeah.
Whereas most of the leisure users don't go anywhere anyway.
Well, they yeah.
No, I'm telling you that.
I think
Most of them just
there's
sit
a
in their
journal
Yeah.
which states, in terms of percentages, the main causes and sources of invasive species, and the top cause that they found in this journal was ballast water. They did take into account tourist craft, and they did source invasive species, but the percentage was nowhere near as high as it was on ballast
Yeah,
water.
of course, yeah.
Up to 10,000
Obviously,
invasive species.
these areas are very close together, so even if it has
So
come in
current,
on the commercial,
it could still
it
show
would
up
still
on.
be likely to have
Yeah,
spread.
definitely.
There was a similar project last year, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
I think it was March.
Lisa.
Oh,
Lisa was just.
She was doing something,
Yeah.
and it's important for the area, the community,
Yeah.
that because it's going to be picked up every year presumably.
Yeah.
So I would have said try and keep reference. But two things to tell you about. Pendennis Marine have just put in new set of pontoons.
Right.
Right?
Really?
Yeah. So go and speak to Mike Webb, or better still, don't speak to Mike Webb. Speak to whatever that lad that runs it. And
Can we get the contacts from you, John?
yeah, of course. And the marina, Falmouth Marina, are dredging and just about to put in a new set of pontoons. Well, you've got brand new virgin,
Yeah.
albeit concrete, floats.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to know why you've gone for plastic, because that is not I mean,
This
any sort of concrete slab would be
this
stone or
material
whatever.
is chosen and tested by the Marine Biological Association because it can be taken out and preserved in formaldehyde.
Oh, I
where
see,
it's-
right, so you've got a
It's a
baseline.
sacrificial sampling where we actually remove it and take the organisms off for like a full identification. Whereas on the sort of pontoons, you have to use the scuba camera or an underwater camera, and you can only identify them there, which is like a little bit harder to identify all species. Whereas with our approach, we are able to take every species off and get a real sort of detailed and accurate
It's making
sample.
it easier to do a statistical test on the two areas with a
Is
fixed
that float?
size.
Is that sink or float?
Well, the weights will be
weights are
attached.
weighted, yeah.
The weights will be attached to it.
Hi, my name's Steve Downing. I'm doing non-native invasive species in the Foul Harbour, comparing recreational and commercially used free-floating pontoons. The bid went surprisingly well, I thought. I was quite nervous, but it went very well.
I'm doing non-native species on fixed recreational and fixed commercial harbours within the Foul, looking at and comparing the difference in the non-native species found. The bid did go well. Some of the questions they asked were quite challenging, but we did enough research to give them a good answer.
My name is Lucy Barnes, and the project I will be conducting is looking at the biodiversity of the fixed pontoons, recreational and floating pontoons, sorry, in Foul Harbour, and the comparisons between the two. The bid went well,
And it's showing, looking at the difference in biodiversity between the commercial and recreational harbour within the Foul estuary. I think the bid went very well, and they asked challenging questions, but we replied with fully researched answers, and I think we surprised them. It was a textbook.